Welcome, everybody. Following this very insightful discussion that we've had with Mr. Shavali, we will continue with a similar theme. We have a session titled Training Local Forces and What Lessons We've Learned from Afghanistan. We'll be engaging in a discussion where three speakers from diverse backgrounds, one from the military, international military, one from the international police, and one from the local civil society organizations are discussing their experiences in Afghanistan. First of all, before I introduce them and hand over the floor, I will go over the housekeeping notes again. Please remember all sessions are being recorded and will be made available on our website and other social media outlets. We encourage you to engage actively. Please ask questions from our audience. You can do so via the conference platform, both anonymously as well as with your own name. When you're, please publicize your participation in our conference. And if you're using Twitter, please use the hashtag PAX PoC 2021, and you can also tag PAX PoC. And with that, let's dive right into our session. First off, we have Mr. Timothy Kudo. He's our first speaker. He's a former U.S. Marine, a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan, who writes about the moral costs of war and its impacts on veterans and the society. He's published in various papers, including New York Times, The Atlantic, The New Republic, and Washington Post. He's previously worked as a policy and communications advisor on multiple American political campaigns, and also was a consultant for the New York office of McKinsey & Company. His work focused primarily on the public and social sectors as well as financial services. His clients include the military and global philanthropic foundations, NGOs, Fortune 100 banks. He has a Master's of Public Administration and Business Administration from New York University, as well as a Master of Science in Teaching from Fordham University, as well as a BA from University of California at Los Angeles. He's currently writing a novel about the Afghanistan war. Timothy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Saba mentioned, I deployed to Afghanistan in 2010 to 11 with the United States Marines as part of President Obama's surge. My unit was the northern tip of the spear in Helmand province, just above the Musa district center. We operated there from several small patrol bases located within the villages we were sent to protect. On a daily basis, we lived next to, shared meals with, and fought alongside the Afghan police and the Afghan army. We believed then and now that the only way to win the war in Afghanistan was by training and equipping them so that they could fight the Taliban on their own. This task proved immensely complicated and ultimately, as we all know, resulted in failure. But the true cost was borne not by us, but by the civilian population who died for our mistakes. At the beginning of my deployment, we received a tactical directive issued by ISAF Commander General David Petraeus. This directive emphasized the importance of partnering with the Afghan security forces as follows, and I quote, "Some civilian casualties result from a misunderstanding or ignorance of local customs and behaviors. No individuals are more attuned to the Afghan culture than our Afghan partners. Accordingly, it is essential that all operations be partnered with an Afghan National Security Force unit and that our Afghan partners be part of the planning and execution phases. Their presence will ensure greater situational awareness, will also serve to alleviate anxiety on the part of the local population and build confidence in Afghan security forces." This was sound theory, but proved difficult to put into practice. One of my first days in Afghanistan, a Marine squad was pinned down by the Taliban. From our command post, we watched the video feed from an F-18 aircraft, and inside a compound, we saw two Taliban fighters with machine guns. The threat to the Marines was imminent. Even so, it would have only taken a few minutes to summon the Afghan army commander for his tactical opinion. However, given the risk to the Marines on the ground, even that small amount of time was felt not worth risking for a bomb strike that we all knew was coming. Such strikes were ubiquitous throughout the war. In my 7-month deployment, I lost count of the number that I executed. The sophistication of our surveillance technology gave us an illusion of situational awareness. It let us believe we'd solve the problems presented by the fog of war. But in Afghanistan, that fog was almost always precipitated by American cultural ignorance. We observed the compound for civilians even as the squad was under fire. We saw there were none. Then the F-18 was cleared hot. A precision-guided 500-pound bomb sped toward the two fighters. It landed per specifications within feet of the point that had been targeted. Both men were killed instantly, ending the battle. Only after the squad conducted its battle damage assessment did they see the limbs and bodies of several small children dead in the rubble of the collapsed compound wall. Had we summoned that Afghan commander who was familiar with the area, would he have known that a family of 5 lived there? That the Taliban fighters regularly fought from civilian-occupied compounds as a way of mitigating our airstrikes? Would that Afghan commander who had fought in the valley for many, many years known much more about the situation than those of us who were only there for 7 months at most? Unfortunately, they were left out of the decision that day, and too many others. But why? The fact is that despite our strategic goal, the daily operational tempo of war made partnering at a high level incredibly difficult. Our Afghan partners had only a limited ability to handle basic patrolling at the ground level, making air support far beyond the scope of their capabilities when I arrived. In this and so many other cases, our reach exceeded our grasp. In another case, we were in a long-running firefight with the Taliban that extended for several hours. 2 men on a motorcycle came up over the valley wall. They stopped at high ground above us. If they'd opened fire, we were vulnerable, and we did not know their intentions. Unable to determine whether they were civilians or Taliban, we conducted escalation of force procedures. These included yelling at the 2 men to leave, waving them away, throwing smoke in their direction. The Marines had long rehearsed this sequence of actions. However, it was entirely new to the 2 Afghan men before us. Did it confuse them? Did they disregard it? Was their vision impaired through lack of nutrition that they couldn't see what we were doing? I'll never know. They continued toward us until a Marine said that he saw a muzzle flash coming from their direction. He opened fire. Because they'd ignored or not understood our escalation of force, that Marine's actions were now justified as self-defense. But the muzzle flash he saw turned out to be nothing more than the sun glaring off chrome. The rounds ricocheted off their motorcycle, and they fell dead instantly. As we approached the 2 men, I remember a Marine praying that he hoped that he had a weapon. They did not. But under the rules that govern us, it was known as a good shoot with a bad result, all because we had followed a set of rules completely foreign to the 2 dead men before us. In fact, they were just trying to make their way home when we killed them less than 50 meters from their doorstep. Their family had been inside watching and emerged grief-stricken and traumatized to collect the bodies. Again, had the Afghan security forces been with us that day, would they have recognized the 2 men's behavior? Could they have signaled to them to turn around in some way we did not? I will never know as well. In reality, the Afghan police and army were spread thin throughout our 5 positions and of varying quality. On some days, they patrolled with us as equals, leveraging their common nationality to form relationships with local villagers and elders. On others, they did little more than follow us on patrol, their weapons slung over their shoulders, waiting to return to base. But if local security forces seem like a solution to these problems, they also have their own challenges. Afghan forces fought alongside us, but they also often fought by their own rules and customs. At one end of the spectrum, the police and army might use checkpoints and otherwise solicit bribes from the local villagers. Sometimes this was driven by greed. Other times it was due to higher level corruption that left the soldiers and police without adequate salaries and supplies. Either way, it delegitimized the government they represented and built resentment among the Afghan people who, like all citizenry, despise public corruption. That was only the tip of the iceberg. The laws of armed conflict protect prisoners and prohibit torture, but our Afghan counterparts often did not follow those rules either. At one point, the Afghan army unit that we lived with was arrested a Taliban fighter who they said had planted a bomb. Initially, I was encouraged by the initiative. Often the soldiers and police, like I said, simply trailed us behind us on patrol, if they went on patrol at all, that is. But the new army commander had good initiative and had not only sent out a patrol without us, but they'd captured a prisoner. However, when I arrived at their side of the compound, I found the Afghan soldiers with a frightened teenager. They had no evidence, only suspicions, and thankfully in that particular case, I was able to secure the boy's release. But unfortunately, even then, they'd already had the chance to beat him in pursuit of a confession. At its worst, Afghan security forces have used their power for sexual assault, rape, and pederasty. Often the most powerful and highest-ranking soldiers or police were the perpetrators of these crimes. This made it particularly difficult, if not impossible, to address. The American chain of command often ignored such issues in the abstract, and intervention was only allowed for crimes that we observed in progress. And the Afghan chain of command reports about violations likewise fell on deaf ears. As American senior officers were apt to point out, our mission was not to stop such crimes, but to fight the Taliban insurgency. That meant a tactical victory over an abusive commander could result in a strategic loss for the overall war effort. Additionally, attempts to confront perpetrators directly could provoke green on blue attacks and Marine casualties. And yet it wasn't until later that many Marines paid the cost of their inaction. Faced with crimes they were not allowed to stop, Marines saw themselves as accomplices and suffered moral injury long after returning home. Putting an Afghan face on military operations was a critical step to minimizing cultural misunderstandings that might result in civilian death and injury. Doing so, however, required humility, and humility, then as now, is uncommon amongst the American military, which considers itself not only technologically superior, but the best in the world. Working with local partners is time-consuming, often frustrating, and the skill set required to do it may not be trainable. Instead, military leaders should search carefully for those soldiers, regardless of rank, who have an aptitude for such work and support them relentlessly. Additionally, historical, cultural, and political training by the partnering force is critical before arriving in country. Otherwise, it will become a limiting factor for the technical expertise that advisors go there to provide. Further, in an active conflict, military training is often secondary to the job of fighting the war itself. This ensures that the mistakes made will be borne by the civilian population. To minimize casualties requires training on top of ongoing operations, but that requires resources and time that neither side of the partnership may have or be willing to contribute. Yet if we're to fail in training so that we can succeed in more, then we have no choice. Protecting civilians is most difficult when partners must police violations of the laws of armed conflict and other mission-critical violations of civil law and morality. These dilemmas will inevitably arise. It's imperative that procedures are already in place to resolve such disputes. Ideally, they would be agreed upon both by both security forces, so both chains of command are explicit about what is and is not morally permissible. Failing to create standard operating procedures to address such dilemmas is as much a failure of command as failing to train and prepare your troops for an ambush. Additionally, providing a mechanism for procedural justice can also reduce the moral injury of those who must confront such problems. Explicit procedures provide clear course of action, even if the resolution of the ultimate problem is above a particular soldier's pay grade. But most importantly, before the die is cast by the first rounds fired, we must cultivate an awareness of our common humanity. That humanity struggles in the heart of all soldiers against war's dehumanization, even when our fight is just. Every culture, religion, and creed values the sanctity of innocent life. Soldiers, whether American or European, Afghan or Iraqi, friend or foe, wrestle with the consequences of their actions long after the fighting is over. By emphasizing the profound moral cost of civilian casualties before soldiers are sent into battle, we can give them their best chance to return home to their families with their honor and spirit clean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timothy, for this very open and frank discussion where you discuss both the successes, failures, challenges as an international military deployed in Afghanistan, but also the challenges working with local Afghan forces, as well as how you highlighted the importance of working more meaningfully with local partners to get that cultural awareness through to avoid the civilian casualties. But I think extremely important was the importance of was when you highlighted the importance of procedural justice and the moral implications of civilian casualties. I now hand over the floor to Joka Florax, who is the Chief Inspector of National Police here in the Netherlands. She has over 44 years of experience in the Dutch police in various positions, but mainly in executive roles. She's done general policing, community policing, as well as more specialized work as a trainer, team leader, as well as coordinating on diversity, discrimination, and gender. She was a part of the EU mission in Afghanistan, or EU POL in Afghanistan, for 1 year between 2011 and 2012, where she trained Afghan female police members. She's also worked in establishing female police network meetings, all-female basic police training, and all-female NCO training. She's also served in the EU assistance mission in Iraq for 3 months, recently in 2020. Joka, I hand over the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Like I said, I'm Joka Florax. I'm a Chief Inspector of the Dutch. I can only reflect on my period in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2012. And I had some sheets. I don't know. I don't see them now.
Yes. Your slides will be played. Yes. Here we go.
Okay, that's great. So when I started in the UPOL mission, Afghanistan, my task was to be an advisor on human rights and gender for the Kabul City Police. And in the first question I asked over there, I said, how many police women are working here in Kabul City Police? And at that time, around 300 police women were working over there. And I started with training, also the training for policemen. But the first thing you have to do is to convince the authority, to the management, of why you want to train women police officers. You can do it by two ways. One way is that you say it is because the equal rights of women to participate as a police officer in the security sector. Because they have equal rights, because of the resolution 1325, all reasons why you think this is important to have police women in the police force. But the other way is about saying that it is because it is effective for the police organization to have police women into your organization as a business case. And I must say, as a business case, for me, it's important because it makes police more approachable. Also for the half part of the citizens, the female citizens, to come to the police stations. And it improves also the violence. I see now on the sheet, you see decreased violence and discrimination against women, and it improves de-escalation in conflict situations. But the important thing is it improves the information position. As a police officer, we all know that intention-led policing is a very big part of our police work, to collect information. And it is, in that case, it is important that because women have information, they are the ears and the eyes of the community, and they have the information. So as a police officer, you have to gather that information, and by a male, it is not allowed to collect that information from a female. So for me, it is the way to address the situation of the business case of policing. Also in the Netherlands, I had the experience, like you heard, I have 44 years experience as a police officer, to draw the equality card. It is not the way to come into a male police society, but just address the importance of the roles of women have into an effective police office, policing. The second, please. Second sheet. In the second sheet, I don't think you see it. Oh yes, it's here now. It's important if you try to convince, to start a discussion with the male police officers why it's important, use police language. Use the language the policemen understand about collecting evidence, about questioning, about information. Use the operational examples. It is very important. And the other thing, it's important that you look into, for a female, a safe learning environment. My experience was, in the first time that I asked to train also police women, I got mixed classrooms mixed with male police officers and 2 police female into that into the training. The female were very eager to learn, but after the coffee break, they were really quiet and they were not saying anything more. So you know what's happened during the coffee break. They were not allowed to be eager for learning or to ask questions or to speak out. So this was not a safe learning environment for police women to grow in their role. So then I started to train only female, and also by having all female trainers. Because to organize a safe learning environment, they were learning, they were networking, and they were stand up by themselves in front of the classroom to tell about their experience. So this was really important to see. Also, I saw, because I had all female training, they all want to attend. So in 1 year, I trained about 123 female, because they all wanted to attend this training, because for them it was secure, and also the family members allowed them, their husbands, they allowed them to come to that training because they were all female in that training. For me, it's important that you also walk on their roadmap. What I mean is, normally in the West, we have our training duration from 8 o'clock in the morning till, let's say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was not possible for female to come at 8 o'clock to this police station to be trained. So you have to ask them from what is for you suitable. If it's suitable to come at 10 o'clock and stop on 3 o'clock, that is okay. Then you have to organize your training in that period. But for me, it was also important that they had the whole curriculum, also the same curriculum of training by men. They got the same training by women. So instead of an 8 weeks training, it had a duration from 12 weeks, because I made the days shorter. Another thing for me was also a learning moment, is that you have to apply also to their responsibilities. Because sometimes the ladies came into the training and it was very nice, but the next day, 1 or 2, they said, "Oh no, I'm not able to come, but because I have a party the next day and I have to cook." You know, if you want to train, if you want to be a policewoman, then also be a little bit hard on that, safe and okay, then you have to come and you have to follow this training, and not only suitable when it's fit for you. So this is some tricks, and what I saw during my period in 2011 till 2012, that they were very eager and they were very interesting in learning. And sometimes you had, they say, why are you training them? Because they don't get the position. There were some positions in the Tashkil, special organized for female, but then the management, they told us, they don't get that position because they are not trained. So sometimes you have to start first with training and try to get them into the position. But, you know, it is a hard way. And I'm now feel very sorry about the position the police female on these days have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joka. I think you've especially, security sector, like you've mentioned, is generally a very male-dominated arena. And thank you for sharing your insight from a gender lens, especially from the context of Afghanistan. And also, sharing with us that training is not an end of itself. You need to have follow-ups and proper roadmaps. Before I invite our third speaker, I also want to remind our online audience to join us at slido.com, where they can ask questions from our wonderful panelists. And now I would like to invite John Muhammad Butt, who's a personal inspiration for me. He's graduated from one of the most famous Islamic seminaries in South Asia, the Darul Uloom Deoband in India in 1983. He began his career in journalism and later in broadcasting. In 1991, he joined BBC World Service for Afghanistan and was elected by the BBC to head what became known as the Archers for Afghanistan. The Archers being a famous radio serial drama set up in the wake of the Second World War and is still running on BBC Radio 4. Since then, John has devoted his career to setting up and running several radio serial dramas in various parts of Asia and Africa, particularly, of course, in Afghanistan, where his current radio serial drama, the Pore drama, remains on air till now. Protection of civilians has also remained one of the main topics that his radio serial dramas have discussed, and that's been the case for more than 25 years now. Along with close association with organizations such as ICRC, his classical Islamic education has also enabled him to work in this field in a very culturally appropriate manner. John, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Saba. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, I'll be seeing things clearly more from a civilian's point of view. And the interventions that we did in our soap opera, I would like to say from the onset, were more not for the official police or for the official army, but more with the armed opposition in mind, because they were more, because our communications, our output, our radio soap opera, as Saba mentioned, was, of course, in Pashto. And so within the local vernacular, so we didn't have, we didn't have any interaction with the outside, with the foreign forces in Afghanistan. So, yeah, if we could have the first slide, please. To go back, have sort of mentioned on the front page, that I'd be giving a sort of historical and cultural background. So where does one go back to give this historical and cultural background? Well, I think I need to go back to 1994, because that was when the Taliban first started taking over Afghanistan, and one needs to mention, it's perhaps something which is not highlighted a lot in the Western media, was that actually their taking over Afghanistan in 1994 was a big relief for civilians in Afghanistan. Because, could we have the next slide, please? It was a big relief for the civilians in Afghanistan, because they, up till 1994, particularly in between 1992 and 1994, which was when there was an interregnum between the communist government in Afghanistan and the Taliban. Well, it was a time of, fleecing and exploitation and oppression of the population. And as Mr. Shawali knows, I don't know if he's here now, but he was there then. There was checkposts everywhere. I can remember going to one district in Afghanistan at that time, and I had a car with me, and someone said to me, well, in this district which you're about to enter, there's 150 checkposts in just one district. So a district is just about like a county in the United Kingdom. So, I think a county in America as well, just about. So, a pretty small space, 150 checkposts. And they said to me that, if you want to get rid of your car, then better go into that district. If you want to keep your car, then better go back. So I went back. But, there were but that was completely petty compared to the excesses which Afghan civilians were subjected to. They were tortured, they were fleeced, they were raped, they were murdered at these checkposts, and and if they didn't, if they didn't cough up some money, if they'd gone to buy some things for their families, then they were just that would be taken off them. So they were subjected to unspeakable type of atrocities and outrages. So the other reason that people were pleased to see the Taliban come to power was that, there were indiscriminate rocket attacks, particularly in Kabul, Kabul being the capital. So Kabul was a front line between those who were occupying Kabul and those who wanted to occupy Kabul. So there was a front line, and there were rockets falling every day and all day in Kabul, prior to the Taliban taking power in Afghanistan. So it was a relief for the civilians that when the Taliban first took power in 1994, and of course they consolidated that power by taking power in Kabul in 1996. Could we have the next slide, perhaps? So now we come to the fall of the Taliban. Of course, we want to sort of learn from mistakes. So this is not for, finger pointing that I mentioned these mistakes. But, when in 2001, when the Taliban government fell in Afghanistan, they turned to the very people who were discredited because they had been part of the outrages against civilians up till 1994 or up till 1996, depending when that particular area of Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. So they were the ones that they turned to, the West turned to as partners. They turned to the very people who were discredited in Afghanistan. And as I think now a lot of people realize that those people realized that that this was a better way of making a fast buck. They didn't have to set up checkposts anymore. They could just cooperate with the Western forces and make a lot of money that way. So that was the first. And prior to what I was also involved, as we'll come to, the political and constitutional process of 2002, 2003. Then prior to that, there were Bonn Accords. So that there was a roadmap was agreed in Bonn that this will be the roadmap to a new constitution and a new political setup in Afghanistan. So the Taliban were not involved, and that time the Secretary of Defense, the Taliban offered to also surrender at that time, and they were willing to be part of the process. Of course, everybody, not just myself, but everybody, all expert and experienced Afghan observers realized that that was a mistake, and the Taliban should have been involved in that process at that time. They would have come within the political process, and they even offered to surrender. And the Secretary of Defense of the United States is on record of having said, the United States is not in the business of negotiating surrenders. So, it was just dismissed. And everybody really wanted the Taliban to go away rather than realizing that there would be a lasting force in Afghanistan. So, as I say, this, there's a picture on this. If we could have the next slide, please. Yeah. It just shows me, the actual future president of Afghanistan is in the background there. And this was the constitutional Loy Jirga of 2003. Loy Jirga is a Grand Assembly in Afghanistan. So there were two Grand Assembly, and I was granted access to both those Grand Assemblies as in order to make programs, radio programs in support of the political process. And, it was a time of great hope in Afghanistan at that time. Which of course there was, if we could have the next slide, please. If a lot of hope was invested in that process. So one, how did the disillusionment set in? So, there was, I can vividly, because Khost, south of Kabul, is one of the areas that I used to visit frequently. One completely groundbreaking event happened in Khost, which was the people were on their way from Khost up one of the nearby valleys. And, it was too easy for people who had a score to settle. Just the other day, someone was saying to me, a lot of people are trying to reach the West now. So someone was saying to me, that, I'm from the north of the country and I cooperated with you. So a lot of people want to get rid of me. There might be other people who are in his organization who want to get rid of him, want him out of the way. So he's saying that, a lot of people are saying, I worked with a foreign organization. And so, the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of people want to score settle on the back of a new regime coming into power. So there was not enough checking done of reports. So, so it was very easy. A huge convoy is on its way from Horst to another part of the same province. Someone who's got a grudge with that family, they're Taliban. So there was not enough checking of such reports done. And I remember a wedding party which was on a way to a wedding, was bombed. And, I don't have conclusive proof of this, but the word was in Horst at that time was that, it was because of a false report given by their enemies. Let's exterminate the family of our enemies all in one go. So, and not enough checking was done of such reports. Weddings, there's lots of weddings that were targeted, sometimes perhaps on the basis, could we have the next report, the next slide, please? Sometimes on the basis of wrong reports, but sometimes, if we could have the next slide, which is flying to mistaken conclusions, thank you. Then sometimes there would be fire, as Timothy said earlier, that there was civilians there, and they did their best to ascertain, but people don't know, and perhaps in the area there would be a ban on aerial firing, and people might not know about that. Like Timothy said earlier, that those two people who sadly died, perhaps they didn't know, and they didn't know. I think Timothy admitted that they didn't know about the regulations in that area, and they weren't aware, and maybe there was a ban on aerial firing, but aerial firing would be mistaken as hostile fire, and then the wedding would be bombed, and and I've illustrated an example of that in the slide itself, and this happened many times. So if we could have the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm not sure if from 2013 till 2015, I was heading a group of international NGOs who employed me in order to try and get better access, humanitarian access in the countryside, in the far-flung areas, including areas run by the armed opposition. So the one thing which struck me, I argued very much for a cultural and humanitarian approach to access, and establishment of common ground with the local population, that what we are doing is basically charitable work, humanitarian work, which is quite acceptable in your custom and in your tradition. But the NGOs, unfortunately, to my mind, they had a security approach to access. So they looked at it as a security issue. And the more NGOs put a cordon of security around themselves, the more they became grouped with the occupying forces in Afghanistan, which of course compromised the humanitarian principles on the basis of which I was trying to negotiate access. So I found that to be very much a problem. The security approach to access, humanitarian access, as opposed to the humanitarian approach, which was in common with Afghan culture and with Islam religion as well, of course, in which there's, of course, as with every religion, high regard for charity. So the most, at that time when I was running this, it was the most tragic, to me, the most tragic was the bombing of the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital in northern Afghanistan, in Kunduz, because the head of MSF at that time was a member of my Access group. So I felt it, of course, very keenly, being a close colleague and friend of his. But of course, there might have been greater, excesses and attacks on civilians, and all the details are there about this attack. And I think what it was a lack of understanding of international humanitarian law. Sorry, we went on to the next slide. I probably forgot to mention it. Yeah, it was a lack of understanding of international humanitarian law. The head of MSF at the time, I said, William, I can't pronounce it very well in French, sorry about that. William, were there Taliban fighters being treated in the hospital? And he said, yes, of course there were, John, because that's our job. We have to treat prisoners from wherever wounded people from wherever they come, from whichever side. That's, of course, international humanitarian law. So it was either disregard or lack of knowledge of international humanitarian law. That, I can only imagine that this attack was launched, this bombing of the MSF hospital in Kunduz was because, people were saying there's lots of Taliban there, or I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't privy to, what the communications that went between the government and the U.S. forces, which led to that bombing. But, one can imagine that, the presence of Taliban was a factor in that hospital, was a factor in the bomb raid being launched. So as I said, this is, our own, if I could have the next slide, please. Our own communications efforts at that time were directed towards the people who spoke Pashto, not towards the foreign forces in Afghanistan. So, one thing that there was in common between, nowadays, which is the reason why I, as an Islamic scholar, have come, and I'm not alone in this, but a lot of Islamic scholars have now come to the conclusion that war is now outdated, because you cannot maintain the rules of war with modern weaponry. And I think Afghanistan is an example of this. In the American side, you had, daisy cutter bombs. I remember they were 2001, 2002. Everybody was saying daisy cutter bombs. Recently, I think it was 2017, there was an attack launched on Achin, a very eastern province of Afghanistan, against Daesh forces. And that was a bomb, which is, I don't know what the name of it is, but it's meant to be the biggest bomb, a non-nuclear bomb in the whole American arsenal. Look, if you're using weapons like that, there's bound to be civilian casualties. There's no way that you can protect civilians from the ravages of such bombs. And that's we feel that now war should be consigned to the past.
John, sorry to cut you off here. We're running out of time, and I'd really like to ask you a question from that one of the audience members has posed to you, that if you can speak to this, do you see similar mistakes with excluding armed groups from conversations in other conflicts around the world as well?
Well, it depends. It depends. You see, the idea was, as I said earlier, the people wanted to get rid of the Taliban, so they thought, let's just exclude them from the negotiations. So the Taliban in 2002, I'll probably be unpopular for saying not in 2002, in 2001, were not a terrorist or they were not at that time the reason that they were considered to be, let me put it this way, the reason they were considered to be a terrorist organization was the people that they were harboring. It was, I want to say this, it's culturally, it's an important point. It was very difficult for them to give up the person, that they were harboring, which was the reason for the onslaught in Afghanistan and for their government being toppled. It was very difficult because of Pushtun Wali. I'll tell you there's another Western Islamic scholar like myself. So he died about 2 or 3 months ago. So he was telling the story that, a group of Taliban, there was some meeting in some part of the world. A group of Taliban came to him while they were in power in the 1990s. And they said, and he said to them, "Get rid of this guy for goodness sake." He said to them, you all know who I'm talking about. So they said, "Look, we have one of our, customs is giving refuge to someone who is fleeing, who is a refugee, giving refuge. It's called panah.
Yes.
Giving refuge. So this is something, and this guy was there before the Taliban came around. I mentioned in the first slide, which I didn't, elaborate on it, but he was there in the 1980s and part of the whole effort against the Soviet Union. So it wasn't just when the Taliban came that he was around, but it was very difficult for them to just give this guy up, especially to sort of certain death. They just couldn't do that, according to their own code of honor. So this was, So it depends. So to answer your question, it depends. If it's a group which is, still engaged in hostilities, but the Taliban was, then I would think, people would think twice before involving them in negotiations. But the Taliban had offered to surrender. And this guy, they had just been lumbered with this guy. And, it was very difficult for them to give him up.
Thank you very much, John. We had a very interesting question for Mr. Timothy Kudo as well, who said that training the Afghan forces to resist the Taliban failed. So what would you change in the next conflict to increase the chances of success?
I think Joko could probably attest to some of those issues with a different perspective. My perspective, based primarily on the American military work there, is that, and that's the only experience that I had. Obviously, I don't know what was going on in other regions within Afghanistan and what other foreign militaries were doing there to train the Afghan partners. To me, it's not so much a question of the Afghan capabilities or training or funding that goes to them or Afghan society. It has to do with the fact that the American military was fundamentally not built to do that job, to accomplish that mission. The American military was based, its entire objective is to win wars and win battles. And at that, it does a somewhat good job some of the time, at least in high intensity conflict, to put so many troops on the ground in such a distributed fashion with the expectation that they would be able to just work alongside Afghan counterparts and somehow elevate their capabilities when we had no training to that effect was, I think, just a completely flawed assumption. So I think, we've had success where you have specialized trainers who can go in and work with maybe special forces, Green Berets who can go in and work with smaller units. And they've had extensive training in America to do that kind of job, and that's kind of the focus of their job. But to send in your average soldier and expect them to get along and work with an Afghan counterpart when maybe they don't even have a translator, or the translators, one speaks Pashtun and one speaks Dari or something like that, becomes impractical. So, there's a lot of issues why the Afghan army ended up failing in that country that go beyond the training effort there. But ultimately, I think it's just not a job that a Western military can accomplish.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all our three speakers, Yoka, Timothy, and John, for sharing their experiences with us and very diverse experiences with us. And I have one last question. It says that after the Kabul airstrike destroyed a family during the evacuation, the Pentagon did investigate itself. Is it time for external oversight, or is more training enough?
I mean, if you ask me, I'd say that the American military, at least, focus on civilian casualties is on minimizing them, not eliminating them, and that its ultimate goal, as I said, is to win its nation's wars and win battles. And so while there are steps taken to avoid overt civilian casualties like we saw in the Kabul strike, I think generally speaking, nobody in the American military wants to really address those kinds of issues because, whether it's treating them as war crimes, investigating all incidents of civilian casualties as potential crimes is something that nobody in the military has an ear for, because war fundamentally leads to those kinds of casualties. And it's very, very hard to fight and win wars with a zero casualty approach. So I think that obviously the Americans, which the only one I can speak for, have no interest in doing that. But I think if you did take an approach like that, where all civilian casualties were treated as potential crimes, then you would have a dramatic reduction in them.
Again, thank you very much, Yoka, Timothy, and John. I encourage all our audience members, especially online audience members, to continue engaging with our speakers through the conference platform, as well as on various social media channels that they are active on. Thank you very much once again. And in about 9 minutes, we have the other session where we'll talk about how these lessons learned from Afghanistan can be applied or cannot be applied for the situation in Iraq. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.